So, once again, here we are. Now, we are in the drought. We know what this is like. We've been here multiple years. This is the drought. This is the time period when we don't get all that much ship news because it's about to fall on us like crazy. And since, the most I saw this week was a hint that, there's a ship that I'm working on currently, Lando, but it's not out there yet. So, we don't know. We don't know what's coming. We've taken some guesses, but I kind of wanted to go in a little bit of a different direction because often I get questions or more like requests for comment. I own this ship. I'm thinking of moving up to this ship. What do you think? I own that ship, but I really kind of want this ship now. What do you think? I mean, do you think it's a good buy? Do you think it's a serious buy? Or do you think it's a worthwhile buy? And, for every possible combination, permutation of, play styles, desires, what do you think that you're going to enjoy the most? Because it's very difficult to say, right? Because, many of us can probably relate to the fact that when we are looking at a video game, whether it's, actually it doesn't really matter what type of video game it is. If there's different classes, if there's different vehicles, if there's different things, we can sometimes start out in one place, then figure out, oh my God, well, I actually like the game, actually playing it from a totally different point of view. Like when I first started playing World of Tanks, I loved heavy tanks. At least I thought I did, until they made some really big changes to light tanks, and then I was like, oh my God, these things are so much better. I love this gameplay so much more. So along those lines, having dealt with disappointment, having experienced these sort of things in different games and in different ways, my general guidelines for when I think something is worthwhile, the general, like, the filter that I pass all these things through kind of goes a little something like this. Like, what do I think that I'm going to enjoy may shift over time. You may like doing one role, but then you find, oh no, I like a support role. I thought I wanted to go heavy attack, but instead I want to go, electronic warfare. It's very difficult to say because sometimes a system may sound boring until you see its implementation. Then you go, actually, no, I really like this. This is actually a lot of fun. This kind of surprised me. I think that when you're looking at a ship, especially when we start talking about the big ones, the big high price tag marquee ships of Star Citizen, the things like Idrises and Javelins and things like that, we're talking about serious money now. We're talking about real money. And a misstep in that area could be very, very costly. So generally, when it comes to something like that, even though it's not something that everybody wants to hear, I generally say make sure that you're not solely depending on AI crewing your ship. If you're sitting there and you're going, I'm a member of an org and I'm going, you know what? I'm getting this, I'm getting that, I'm getting the other thing, the big ships. I'm getting them because there are multiple members of my org who have like smaller ships, but I want to have this as a vehicle, not just, for myself, but a metaphorical vehicle for my org, so that we can get together and we can do some more higher end, high price tag, high danger, high risk content. That's why I'm getting this. Then I'm like, okay, good, you're solid. But if you're sitting there and, it's a solid strategy. But if you're sitting there and you're saying, oh, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna entirely flood this ship with AI characters, and then I'm just gonna one-shot everything, I don't know that's gonna be, it may be possible, but would it be profitable? I don't know. To me, when we're talking about things at the high end like that, it sounds to me like you're spinning plates. If you know the old talk show trick from years and years and years ago. Every once in a while, they'd have someone come out on these old talk shows, and they'd be spinning plates on the end of like a pool cue or something like that, like a wooden stick, and they'd have to keep moving around and keep all the plates spinning so that they didn't fall off. And then, how many can you spin? And to me, that's what that sounds like. Like, is it possible? Yes. Can you do it? Yes. But when things start to go wrong, when things start to go sideways and happen in ways that you're not prepared for, or happen at a bad time, when things start to slip, that's generally, in video games, I'm sure you'll all be very familiar with this, that's generally when things all of a sudden just completely collapse. That's often, when things start to go wrong, they can cascade very quickly. Like I said, if you're playing a lot of video games, especially team-based video games, that sometimes it can just take one little mistake, and then all of a sudden it's like a house of cards. It just all comes crumbling down. So I would be very, very careful about making the assumption that that is an entirely safe strategy. It may work in certain scenarios that are predictable, but when you involve other players, maybe other players in opposition, things can get very unpredictable very quickly. So I would be very, very careful about proceeding on that road. If you're saying, well, what should I do then, because I really want to have this thing, I would say go out there and find an org that possibly has a lot of members who are in smaller ships, and you're saying, hey, I would like to bring this to the table, and if you guys are interested, I realize that it's not going to be an everyday thing. Like, I can't just log in and say, everybody get on my ship, let's do my thing. But when we have the time, when we're feeling disposed to do this, I would like to bring, this asset to the organization and share it with all of you. I think you may be able to kind of live things out that way, Now, capital ships is, let's put that aside. Let's talk about the complete opposite end of the spectrum, which is fighters. Now, fighters is something that I find very difficult to talk about. And, obviously, I've talked about this kind of a lot lately, which has kind of revealed the fact that I have to state right off the bat that I do have something of a prejudice against fighters currently, and its travel time through the universe is one of the big ones, and the limitations on range. Now, certainly, it seems to be manifesting itself the way CIG wants it to be, but I think that it's more designed around something that would make sense for Squadron 42 and why you would have an Idris carrying you around a star system, more than something that really makes sense in Star Citizen. They're really leaning into those limitations with overheating, quantum fuel, all these things. They're really trying to kind of say maybe you don't want to take a fighter that far. And as this universe expands, recently we were talking about the addition of possible future star systems, a reveal of which I fully expect to see this year. I think that it is going to become a less attractive mode of play for a lot of people out there. I don't think that it necessarily means it's dead, but I'm very leery of fighters. And, once again, that is a personal prejudice. You may not share that prejudice. You may think that, oh, no, it's going to be fine. They'll work it all out. We'll balance it. We'll get them to do what we want. Okay. The other thing about fighters is that, we've had so many changes to the flight model. So many little tweaks, so many little changes, so many little nudges in this direction or that direction that, fighters are probably the most sensitive ships to the changes in flight model and the way it operates. They're probably the ones that are the most impacted by changes to the flight model. And so, coupling that with, each one is supposed to have a slightly unique behavior, a unique type of handling, which can affect your enjoyment of that ship. And it very much, to me, it becomes something that, it makes it more unstable in my eyes. It makes it, like you look at a fighter and you think, oh yeah, that's going to be great. But then, it may not even be changes that they make to the fighter. It could be changes that they make to the flight model itself that affect that fighter in such a way as to make it unenjoyable to fly. So I feel that we are kind of moving into an area where we're going to have some kind of a reckoning when it comes to fighters. And CIG is either going to have to sit there and say, you know what, it may work for Squadron 42, but it really doesn't work for the universe, which is kind of where I see things going. And we're probably going to get some changes in terms of range and handling. But I think that overall, lately we've been going backwards with the flight model, and by some pretty big steps. And it, I don't feel that money expended in this area right now is necessarily a good idea. But the advantages to having these sales is, like, if you're sitting there, you might be saying, what should I buy? But other people might be saying, what should I turn the money that I've already spent into? And that's one of the important things to acknowledge, is that you can essentially recycle that ship and turn it into a ship that turns out better. That's kind of one of the good things. And hopefully in the future they make that model a little less convoluted, but right now it is what it is. And so I'm not overly enthusiastic about the future of fighters right now. I would like to see a little bit more development, a little bit more, a little bit more of a solid approach to where we can start to make some decent assumptions about where these fighters are going to end up, because right now they really seem too much up in the air for me to personally spend my money on, though you may view things differently. Now from this, we've done the extremes. Let's talk about the middle, the medium-sized ships. So I'm talking about ships like this one here, the Cutlass, all the way up to, the Corsairs, the Constellations, the Caterpillars. Caterpillar, I think, would be at kind of like the high extreme end of this, but in general, the ships in that zone in terms of crew population and size, or necessary crew population and size. I think that these ships are probably long-term the safest bets in Star Citizen. Their handling is such that I don't think that, unless the changes to the flight model are really major, they aren't really going to affect them. If you think about the problems we had recently with the Reclaimer and getting the Reclaimer up out of atmosphere, and that caused a bit of a stir. I kind of helped stir that a little bit. Those changes to the flight model affected those big ships very profoundly, but ships like the Caterpillar, ships like the Cutlass, ships like even the Hammerhead to a certain degree, but you know what I'm saying? They really weren't all that, heavily affected by it. Changes to the fuel system and the overheat system, which affected fighters so profoundly. Really, were these changes noticeable for these medium-sized ships? No, they weren't. They kind of just kept on chugging, and that's the great thing about them, is that they sit in such a sweet spot in so many ways that, you can look at something like a Cutlass, or you can look at something like, a Vanguard, and say, I can easily see how this is soloable. I can easily see how I can do this. And then even if you move up to, say, probably on the more extreme end, something about the size of a Caterpillar, you can say, well, if I can get some AI blades that at least allow me to slave the larger guns on the Caterpillar, maybe I can do something with that. And so it may not be optimally soloable, but it may be close enough to really work on a practical level day in and day out? Maybe. You know, this is really where I think Star Citizen's safe area is. It's a place where the ships, I think, are, in a way, the way they interface with the game and the world, they're the least impacted by changes, and they generally seem to be the safer bets, and some of them are actually very reasonably priced. I mean, the Cutlass, if you buy a Cutlass flat out, it's $100, right? Versus if you go buy a Polaris, it's worth quite a few Cutlasses, depending on what price we get for it this year. I think that when you're waiting to see how things are going to shake out in the game, how things are going to end up, especially on either of the far ends of the spectrum, the medium-sized ships, whether you want a Corsair or a Constellation or whatever, or maybe you want to move up to something bigger. If you have the option through a buyback token to go back to that bigger thing at a later date, great. But I think that day in and day out, when you're just playing the game, when you're enjoying it right now, medium ships are kind of the kings right now, and they're probably going to continue to be so even if we move into a new star system, say, I don't know, June-ish of next year. I think that is, I feel that is the safest place to park money. When you're talking about looking at a ship for this game, even if you don't intend to keep this ship forever, it's not a bad place to park your money because it allows you to enjoy what is currently available, I think, at a level much higher than a fighter or a large ship, let's say Hammerhead and bigger, can provide on an individual level. Not something that's so dependent on other people joining you or so limited by its range that, even to do the simplest missions takes 1 or 2 extra, minutes or 10 or 20 to get around in that universe and get things done, and maybe you don't even have the cargo space to do what you need to do. Medium ships, I think, are right now the best ships in the game for enjoying the game currently, and long term, they're probably going to be the ships that are least affected by any changes that CIG makes in the future. I think that they're probably the most solid ships in terms of what they are now versus what they're going to end up being. If you're going to invest in one of them, that's where I think the most solid investment is. In general, that's kind of the way that I judge the ships in the game currently. That's where I think of what the future of the game entails for a lot of ships, and that's kind of the filter that I put all the ships through and when I make my judgments on them. So I hope this helps, and I guess we'll see what the anniversary sale in 20-ish days has in store for us. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.